Hello and welcome to this After Effects Basics tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to look at how to make assets fit in our screen so that they fit properly and aren't distorted, and we're also going to look at how to create solids and how to understand the settings in solids, including how to select colours for solids so that you understand the different ways of selecting colour that you have in After Effects. Okay, so firstly we need to bring some assets in, so I'm going to double click in this area here, or I'm going to do Control or Command I to open up the import dialog box, and I've got some pictures, and I'm going to choose two in different aspects. So I'm going to hold my Control key or Command on the Mac and choose the Dunstanburgh Castle and the seabird and click open, and both of those come into my project. Now I've already got a composition created. It's called Fit, and you can see the size of the composition here. It's 1050 by 576 with a pixel aspect ratio, a square pixel aspect ratio, so 1 for the pixel aspect ratio, and this is for PAL widescreen square pixel. So if I bring in one of these items into this project, if we just click on one of them, let's look at Dunstanburgh Castle, you can immediately see that up here the size of this picture is massively bigger than the composition. So it's not going to fit when we pull it in. Okay, so let's just add it anyway. So I'm going to drag it down to the timeline down here and let go. And we can only see a part of the actual picture. And you can actually click and drag and pull it around to see that there's an awful lot more to it than we started. Control Z to get it back to the same point. Now there are tools to be able to make this item fit, but you need to be just a little bit careful how you use them, because there is one item that can make it fit, but it will squash it or stretch it to be able to make sure it fits properly inside your screen, whereas there are other options that make it fit either to the height or to the width of the picture and stop it squashing. Now one of the things that's great about After Effects is context clicking. And what do I mean by context clicking? Well, it's usually a right click, whereas sometimes on an Apple with a single button mouse it's a control click. But if you right click or control click for those with a single button mouse on a Mac, on any of the windows, you get a context menu. Now let me just demonstrate. If I context click or right click on the project panel, I get items to do with the project panel. So a new composition, new folder, new Photoshop file, import recent footage. Whereas if I control click down here in the timeline, or right click if I'm on a PC, you'll see that I get the option to create new items, composition settings, preview options, and bits and pieces that fit in with the timeline. If I select the footage and right click on the footage, I get a whole different set of options which are to do with the footage, and I would get the same options if I right click or context click up here in the composition panel. I get a whole bunch of options to. Now quite often if you don't know quite where things are, the best thing to do is actually select what you're working on and context click it, and then you can often find what you're looking for. Alternatively, what we're looking for can be found up here in the layer menu. And when you go to the layer menu, you go down to transform, and you'll see that at the bottom there are three options. There is fit to comp width, fit to comp height. Now the one that I often teach people is the Control Alt F or the Command Option F in Mac, and if you click your item and do Control Alt F or Command Option F, you'll see that the actual image fits in perfectly. However, it has or could have been squashed and stretched, and we'll see that better with the seabirds. So I'm just going to turn the eyeball off on this layer and drag in the seabirds on top. Now we can't see the seabirds because it's far too big. Once again, it's a massive picture. But if we do a Control Alt F or a Command Option F, you'll see that it looks particularly weird. It's not fitting at all well, and this is what you need to be careful of if you're trying to get an item to fit. You can make it fit, but you might end up with it looking particularly weird. So let's look at those other options. So either go to Layer, Transforms and find them here, or just simply right click, context click and go to the same thing, Transforms, and then we can go to Fit to Comp Height. And there you can see we've got the proper aspect ratio for the picture, but of course we've also got plenty of spare space at the side. I've got my transparency grid showing. You can toggle it off and on down here if you just want to see black at the back. The other option here would to be right click again, go to transform and then fit to comp width, and then actually you can see that when we go to width we get a much better perspective. The bird is correct from its aspect ratio and it's fitting into the project, and if I want to I can pull it up and down and just move things around to make it fit that little bit better. So that's how you can make an item fit to your screen, to your composition, but just be careful so that you don't end up with something that just looks horrendous because you've just made it fit, but actually what you've done is squish it and stretch it and make it look awful. Okay, so now that we've found out how to make items fit, How do we create solids? And maybe another important question is, why do we need solids? Well, solids are in many ways the bedrock of After Effects. We're going to create solids and we're going to use solids all the way through our work with After Effects, because solids are where you apply effects. In many instances you would apply an effect to a solid rather than applying it to a piece of footage. For instance, I've got this item here, and if I wanted to add for some reason lightning, I wouldn't add the lightning directly on top of this. I'd probably add it to a solid first to give me better control. Let me just show you why. I actually have this picture of Dunstable Castle. Let's just pretend that we want an effect on top of it that looks like lightning. So I go Effect, and there is actually one, so I select it, so to go to Effect, and there is actually one called Advanced Lightning, which is down in Generate. You go Generate Advanced Lightning. I'm not going to show you how to use this, I'm just going to show you where it is. Click, and it comes on, but actually you've completely lost the original. You do have an option down here that says Comp on the original, but that's probably not the best way of doing it and not really going to give you the amount of control you want. Nope, we're just going to get rid of that, so select it and hit delete. We want to apply it to a solid layer. And solid layers can be used for all kinds of things, not just for applying effects. Solid layers are used extensively all the way through the production workflow. They can be put into 3D space, you can change them, you can draw on them, you can use them to create shapes. There's an awful lot of bits and pieces, you can animate them. Loads of things with solids. So how do we create a solid? Well, you can just go to Layer, New, Solid. There is a keyboard shortcut, Command or Control Y, which I would advise you to learn. I use it all the time. And of course you can context click. You can't context click in a window that's already got something in it. So if I was to get rid of these two layers down here, Dunstable Castle and the Seabirds, and just get rid of them, and now right click, I can create a new solid. But if I Control Z and put those back in, I can't do it on this one. If I right click, you see that I don't get the option to create anything new, but I would do if I was down here in the timeline. So right click in the timeline and I can go new and I can get a solid here. Okay, so let's just look very briefly at what we're going to do with solids. Firstly, you have the opportunity to name your solid, and I always feel that this is a very important point, quite often neglected, but projects can get very big very quickly. And if you have a specific reason for creating a solid, then name the solid with that name so that you know what it is, and if you pass the project on to somebody else, they'll know what it is. So if we know it's going to be lightning, we can actually name it lightning, and then when it comes to it, everybody knows what it is. The next thing it tells us is what is the size, the width and the height. So we know that this is the same as the actual composition that we're working on at the moment. If you remember, it was 1050 by 576. You can lock the pixel aspect ratio. If you click that and change this, then obviously the width is going to change and the height will change proportionally. We're not going to use that, but let's just get it back by clicking here and going 1050. And obviously with this locked, it'll get us back to how we started. But of course you can create a solid any size you like, and again this is very important. Quite a few effects, quite a few items require solids to be used that can be quite small, 10 pixels wide by 10 pixels high, or 20 or 30, very small. Now below that you have units. Now people tend to forget that this is here, but you can choose to do it in pixels, inches and millimeters, but the other one that I think is quite useful is percentage of composition. So if you want something that is completely the full size of your composition, you can do it 100%, but this is the way to easily and very quickly to create something a third, so 33. And of course I didn't have lock change, so I need to make this 33% as well. So you can actually create something that's going to be 33%. Just lock that and take that back up to 100. Oops. Of course you can make it far bigger than 100 if you want. So 100%, so that's going to be the size of the composition. Obviously you can make it much bigger, you can make it much smaller. And percentage is sometimes much easier to think of and work in than pixels if you're not used to working in pixels. But pixels is the standard way it works. And below that you've got pixel aspect ratios, and this is really to do with the sort of composition you're creating, which can often be linked with the sort of footage that you might be using. If you know that it's going to be shown back on the computer monitor and all the footage you're using is generated that way, you can have a square pixel aspect ratio. But if you've got other sorts of footage, and I'm not going to go into detail in these, you can select different ones. I quite often use HDV for instance, so my pixel aspect ratio is 1.33. But we'll stick at square pixels and leave it at that. And if you're not sure what size your composition is, or if you've fiddled around with these numbers, you just click Make Comp Size. The last thing to show you below here is colour. Now you've got a colour swatch, or you've got the option to select a colour. So you can click the picker and we can choose this light green for the grass, and that's the colour of the grass. But actually I just want to show you how to select colours with the colour swatch, because there are options here. Okay, so let's just have a quick look. There are three main buttons here. Hue, saturation and brightness is what they stand for, and of course there is R, red, green, blue, RGB, and you can put values in for all of these. Now if we look at hue, saturation and brightness in the main, at the moment I've got a hue bar here, which is a bar for all the different colours, and I've got two little arrows, and if I click on that I can move it up and down, and you can see all the different colours in the range. And you can go between those, and then inside this bigger area here you can either have it fully saturated by going one way, or completely unsaturated by going the other. That's the right to left, and the top to bottom would be very bright and totally dark. So if I'm totally dark at the bottom, you can see down here it tells me I've got no saturation, no brightness, but my hue still remains the same. I can take it right across, fully saturated, but because there's no brightness it still looks black. And then we can move up and increase the saturation. So that's one option. The second option here is saturation. Now the reason that hue is the default is because you have this whole hue bar here, and you can see all the different colours, whereas if you have saturation or brightness you can lose that. Let me demonstrate. Go to saturation. At the moment, because this bar is at the top, I can see all the colours. This means it's fully saturated. But if I pull this one down to completely unsaturated, you'll see that I've got a hint of a colour here, but the only other options I have is fully bright, fully dark. Okay, and the hue is changing, but I can't really see what the hue is except for the feedback I get in this bar over here. So you can get feedback, but it's not very easy to see in comparison to if you had a fully saturated colour set. So if I take that back up to a fully saturated colours, you've got a whole range of colours, but as you can see you can completely lose them except for when this moves across, so it's not as easy to see. And likewise, if you go to the brightness option, you've got fully bright. If you go right the way to the top, you do still have hue feedback, but if you go to fully dark, you've virtually got no hue feedback, unless again of course you drag around here and you can see the feedback in this bar over here. Now of course you can actually type in any of these, so you can choose it anything from 0 to 360. So 360 would be the maximum. You see it right over this side. Make it 0, you can see it's right over the other side. So we're going across the colour wheel, you have to think 360 degrees. And you can type in a saturation figure, and you can type in a brightness figure. They tend to go up to 100, it's maximum saturation, 0 minimum. And the brightness again, fully bright is 100, totally black is 0. So those are the three options you have here, and of course you can also type in RGB values, and you can even type in a hexadecimal code. So if there is a specific colour somebody wants you to use and they have a hexadecimal code for it, you can type that hexadecimal code in here and have that colour sorted out. And you can look at R, G and B as well, which we're not going to go into detail. So those are the main ways of looking at colour. And once you've selected the colour that you want, you get the total feedback here as to what the actual colour will be. You can click OK, and you can click OK, and your solid is created. Now that solid is fully comp size, as you can see, but that doesn't mean that I can't change it. Of course I can change it any size I like, and Control Alt F or Command Option F will actually make that fit back in again completely. And so we have our solid made. We can apply, let's just show you the one we did before, effect. Now the last effect you use is always at the top here, and we just used Advanced Lighting, so click on Advanced Lighting, and then I've got my Advanced Lighting applied to the solid. The layer underneath is completely unaffected, and what I do with this Advanced Lighting is not going to affect the item below. So that's just one very tiny example. In the next tutorial we're going to be looking at this little tab here which says Transform, because there are a whole bunch of effects that have been applied to this layer, and in fact to every layer that I add to my composition. They're called fixed effects, and we're going to have a look at those in the next tutorial. My name's Andrew Davis. I hope you found this tutorial useful. Thank you for watching.